Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting Great British Road Journey. After 79 weeks and 79 episodes, we've reached the last remaining county in mainland England, Northumberland. The clue is in the name. It's very much in the north, and indeed it's where you'll find England's most northerly point. It's also the least densely populated county, so I'm not expecting to see anyone nor find anything of interest as we take a journey from Hexham to Blyth. As always, to help navigate our way around, we'll be using my 1923 Michelin guidebook, period-correct maps, and here's an old thing. Yes, Hexham's Old Gal, pronounced jail, or Hexham's Old Jail. It's not mentioned in my guidebook, and that's because back then the building was in use as a bank following the jail's closure in 1820. But the interesting thing is that the building was builded in 1332, confirming that it's old, and it's said to be one of the first purpose-built jails in the country. Interestingly, back then and until the 1570s, Hexham was part of Hexhamshire, a county that was later incorporated into Northumberland. It's never been a particularly large town, but it kept itself busy within the leather and tanning industries, and more recently, chipboard. Great. When visiting Hexham, you'll likely spot a large plume of steam, and this marks the location of a factory that was set up in the 1980s to manufacture chipboard and flooring. It's quite simple really. Chop down some trees, grind them up, and then use the fibres and bits of wood to make chipboard. These days they mix in recycled wood and fibre to make up 50% of the final product, using materials that would have otherwise gone to landfill. As for the steam cloud, it's emitted from their wet electrostatic precipitator, which is a chimney designed to filter out all of the contaminants, so the only thing coming out of the top is water vapour. We're heading to Corbridge next, which is so close to Hexham it's not really worth doing a voiceover. From the chipboard factory we'll head along what appears to be an unnumbered road, so it's fairly insignificant, but this road was rerouted because someone decided to build a bypass known as the A69. Anyway, the end result is an abandoned stretch of road and a road bridge. The road, known as Corchester Lane, used to follow this route before it was realigned, and as mentioned, there are the remains of the old road and a bridge to find. I couldn't find any details on the bridge, but it looks old to me, so we'll assume it is. To the west of Corbridge are the remains of an old Roman town known as Coria, aka Corbridge. It's one of several in the area, and they all charge you for entry. If you like paying to look at some old stones, then be my guest, but for cheapskates like me, instead of visiting an old town, there's the Corbridge Roman Bridge. It would have carried a road of sorts over the River Tyne, which would then run straight into the Roman town, and it's believed to have been one of the largest stone bridges in Roman England, at 48 metres in length, consisting of 11 arches at 9 metres in height. The stones that make up the bridge were mostly left in situ following their discovery, but in 2004, with the River Tyne threatening to erode the riverbanks and possibly cover up or remove some of the stones, they were excavated, moved, and then reassembled into the structure that we see today. I'm glad we didn't pay to see these authentic Roman remains. As for the non-Roman town of Corbridge, it's a fairly small place with around 4,000 residents, having roughly doubled in size since the days of my guidebook, according to which there's an old castle here as well as many more Roman remains to look at. But instead, I found an old pottery known as Walker's Pottery that was established in the 1800s. It's now a scheduled monument owing to the extensive leftovers and remains that include an old tramway, chimney and a variety of different kilns, the two bottle kilns perhaps being the most striking. Clay was mostly extracted from pits in the adjacent fields, which would then be transported via the tramway to the pottery for processing and firing. At the site they made a variety of different products, from ornate wheel-thrown pottery to bricks, tiles and pipework. Unlike a lot of industries, this one remained as a small-scale family-operated pottery that enjoyed a lot of success, operating for about 60 or 70 years before closing, and this is most likely down to a change in buyer habits and more modern materials taking over traditional clay-made items. Leaving Corbridge behind, we're to head along some B roads such as the B6321 and the B6318, the latter of which is suspiciously straight, suggesting it might be an old Roman road, but that's not the case. It's called Military Road, and it was built in the 1700s to transport army things between Newcastle and Carlisle, and now we're turning off to get to our next destination. The town of Ponteland, which may be fairly small with around 10,000 residents, but it's far larger than 100 years ago when my guidebook says there were only about 1,000 people living here. Apparently it's here that we find some of the most expensive houses in this part of England, which when I'm done here I intend to burgle. I reckon they'll have some good stuff. Well, I might as well, because my guidebook doesn't make any suggestions on interesting things to see or do, which is quite odd because in the town are quite a few churches and this old castle. Well, it's not really an old castle, it's known as the Vicar's Palais Tower, which sounds impressive, but it was merely part of what used to be a vicar's house. It's thought to have been built in the 1400s, but don't let that fool you, because in the 1600s the structure was completely rebuilt, and in the 1970s it had a full restoration, and as we can see today it's having a bit of work done, so it's certainly in far better condition than it would be otherwise, but it's definitely not original. Breasts! Apparently you don't realise just how large they actually are until you're up close. I've come to see the Lady of the North, found a short distance from Ponteland and to the east of Cramlington. It's a sculpture that's supposedly a piece of art, and maybe it is, but it's also large piles of mine spoil that nobody had any other use for, so you might as well arrange it into a pretty shape with massive bazookas. The entire thing is made up of rock, clay and soil, totalling 1.5 million tonnes, piled up to a height of 100 feet, and the sculpture is 1/4 of a mile long. The tourist information also says that you can get a view into Shotton Surface Mine, a particular attraction for fans of big machinery. Is that so? No, it's not so. They need to update their website. The Shotton open cast coal mine closed in 2020, but at the height of its operation it covered a 400-acre area and they were extracting over 1 million tonnes of coal every year, and the waste material from the mine was used to build Sugar Tits, or the Lady of the North. Cramlington is a funny place. This abandoned road, now pathway, is pretty much all that remains of the original Cramlington. The Cramlington we know today is a new town that was built in 1960s on top of what was a small but no doubt picturesque village. Interestingly though, they overestimated the future population of the town. It was built with the intention of housing 50,000 people, but today they're only about halfway towards that. Because it's a new town, it doesn't get a mention in my guidebook, but it doesn't matter anyway because there's nothing of interest to see or do here. Oh dear, should we move on then? And we're heading to the seaside next, which, if we've learned anything from last week, we know not to get too excited, but the town of Blyth is indeed on the coast, and facts are facts. To get there, we'll be using the B1327, which, like nearly every other road in the area, has changed, because that's what happens when you build a new town, but it does at least mostly follow the older route. I was right to not get too excited. Yes, Blyth is a seaside town, but it's not a seaside resort town. However, it is the largest town in the county with around 40,000 residents, a slight increase from the days of my guidebook when 32,000 people lived here, and it's probably fair to say back then it was a fairly busy place. Today, not so much. Surprisingly, despite its size, my guidebook makes no suggestions on interesting things to see or do, and this usually means we're dealing with an industrial town. In the old days, Blyth was shipping millions of tonnes of coal from its port every year, and at one stage it had one of the largest shipbuilding yards for miles around. But like pretty much every other industry in the town, it went into decline and it all shut down by the 1960s. The last large-scale industry to close was Blyth Power Station, made up of two separate coal-fired power stations known as Blyth A and B. It opened in the late 1950s at a time when everything else was closing down, so you might say it saved the town by providing a whole new set of jobs. To run it required 50,000 tonnes of coal on a weekly basis, and this had to be brought in by rail because somebody had the bright idea of closing down all of the local coal mines a few years prior, but this would provide power for over 300,000 homes. The power station was perhaps most well known for its 4 chimneys, 2 of which stood at 170 metres high, visible for miles around, but you'll notice that these no longer exist. The power station closed in the early 2000s because at the time, with it being one of the oldest operating coal-fired power stations, it had become incredibly inefficient to operate. Or, to put it another way, it wasn't worth it for the shareholders, so they got rid of it and the whole thing was demolished, finishing off the last of the large-scale industry in Blyth. And there we are then, guys. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that, and if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That'll be wicked sweet awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name is John. You've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another exciting Great British Road Journey. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.